There is a specific kind of man who owns too many things he refuses to sell. In the corner of his garage sits a 1987 Kawasaki that hasn't started in 2 winters. The carburetor needs rebuilding. The seat has a crack running along the left side that he keeps meaning to patch. 3 feet away, under a tarp that smells like motor oil and old decisions, there is a 1972 Chevelle with a cracked block and no transmission. He knows exactly what both of them are. Worth. He is not selling either. When his daughter asked him about the Kawasaki last Thanksgiving, could they use the garage space? He said maybe. She's been hearing maybe for 4 years. What most people looking at that garage see is clutter. What they are actually looking at is a psychological system, one that most of the people inside it have never examined, because from the inside it doesn't feel like a system. It feels like common sense. Here is what nobody talks about when they talk about men who ride motorcycles. Riding is not really about movement. It sounds like it should be. The wind, the road, the open throttle, all of that suggests a person moving away from something. But watch the same man when he comes home. He doesn't park the bike and walk straight inside. He sits on it for a moment in the driveway. Sometimes he just stands next to it with his arms crossed, looking at it like it owes him an answer. That pause is the tell, because what riding actually does, underneath the sensation, underneath whatever story a person tells themselves about freedom, is collapse the distance between a man and his own nervous system. When you are on a motorcycle, there is no room for anything else. Your bills don't exist. The argument from Tuesday doesn't exist. The performance review that went sideways doesn't exist. There is only the road surface, your speed, the radius of the turn, the gap between you and the car ahead. Your entire cognitive system narrows to the present moment, not because you chose mindfulness, but because the machine demands it, or you fall. Psychologists have a name for this. They call it forced attentional narrowing. And for men who carry a particularly heavy internal load, the ones who overthink, who replay conversations, who lie awake running scenarios at 2 in the morning, the motorcycle is one of the only things that actually shuts that process down, not slows it. Shuts it. So the bike stops being transportation. It becomes medication, necessary, non-negotiable, and deeply personal in a way that is almost impossible to explain to someone who hasn't needed it. Now hold that image, the man and the bike, and add the car, the old car sitting in that same garage is doing something completely different, but for the same kind of man. Where the motorcycle is about erasure, clearing the noise, the old car is about inscription. It is a record, a physical archive of a particular period in a man's life when the world felt more graspable, when the future was something you drove toward, rather than something that arrived without your permission. Most men can tell you exactly where they were when they first encountered the car they can't let go of. Not approximately, exactly the summer they were 19, the specific gas station where they first saw that body style, the uncle's driveway where they spent 3 weekends learning what a valve cover actually does, the first time they felt a well-tuned engine respond to the throttle, the way a good horse responds to a rider, immediately, honestly, without negotiation. That specificity is not nostalgia. Nostalgia is soft in general. This is something more structural. What researchers studying autobiographical memory have found is that objects connected to high emotion periods of formation, the years roughly between 16 and 25, get encoded differently than ordinary memories. They become what psychologists call self-defining memories, not just things that happened to you, but things that made you who you are. The car isn't separate from the man's identity. It is woven into the part of him that knows who he was before life got complicated. Selling it doesn't feel like selling a car. It feels like agreeing that that version of himself no longer matters. He is not ready to agree to that. Here is where it gets interesting. The same psychological architecture that makes a man keep a motorcycle he can't currently ride and a car he can't currently drive is not irrational. It is the expression of 2 distinct but related needs that modern life is remarkably bad at satisfying. The motorcycle answers the need for immediacy, presence, the felt sense that you are actually here, in your body in this moment, alive in a way that sitting in traffic in a climate-controlled sedan does not produce. The old car answers the need for continuity, the felt sense that you are someone with a history, that your past is not just gone, that the thread of who you have been connects to who you are now. Most men are not walking around consciously aware that they need both of these things. They just know that getting rid of the bike makes them feel genuinely anxious in a way they struggle to articulate. And they know that when they pull back the tarp on the Chevelle and run a hand along the fender, something settles in them that nothing else quite settles. They call it a hobby. It is not a hobby. It is psychological infrastructure. There is a man in Tulsa, Oklahoma who spent 11 years restoring a 1969 Norton Commando and a 1966 Ford Fairlane simultaneously. His wife said he had to choose. He chose both. When asked why he couldn't let either of them go even during a period when money was genuinely tight, he said something worth sitting with. He said the bike was about who he could still become. And the car was about proving that who he used to be was real. That is not a casual statement. That is a man describing with surprising precision the two psychological functions these machines serve. One oriented toward the future, one anchored to the past, and why removing either one would leave something in him without a home. Because here is what people miss when they look at that garage full of projects and see disorder. Those machines are holding something for him. They are holding the parts of himself that don't fit anywhere else in his life. Not at work, where he performs a role. Not at home, where he is needed in specific practical ways. Not in conversation, where there is rarely space to say, I need to feel competent in a world that gives me clear feedback, and I need to remember who I was before I became this responsible, this tired, this far from the version of myself that first touched an engine and felt something wake up. The garage holds all of that. The motorcycle and the car are not possessions. They are the only honest biography he has. Now consider what happens when someone pressures this kind of man to let go, when the wife says it's just taking up space, when the son offers to help him sell it, when the financial pressure becomes real enough that the logical move is obvious to everyone around him. Watch what happens in his face. It is not defensiveness exactly. It is something closer to the expression a person makes when they realize the person talking to them doesn't understand what is actually being asked, not because they're wrong about the money, but because they're wrong about what is at stake. He knows the carburetor isn't fixed. He knows he hasn't ridden the bike in 8 months. He knows the Chevelle needs more work than he will probably ever finish. None of that is the point. The point is that as long as those machines are there, certain things remain possible. The ride he's going to take in the spring, the weekend he and his oldest son are going to spend finally getting the engine rebuilt, the version of himself that is still capable of something that requires patience, skill, and the willingness to get it wrong before getting it right. The day he sells them is the day he admits those things are not going to happen. He is not ready for that admission. And maybe this is worth considering. Maybe he shouldn't have to. B. There is a particular kind of intelligence in keeping things that other people have decided are finished. The man with the motorcycle, he can't ride, and the car he can't drive is not deluded. He is not stuck. He is maintaining, sometimes unconsciously, sometimes at real cost, the psychological conditions that allow him to remain someone who believes that broken things can be brought back. That is a belief worth protecting, because the alternative, the garage cleared out, the space practical and empty and available, comes with a loss that has nothing to do with square footage. The question isn't whether those machines are worth keeping. The question is what a man is actually keeping them for, whether the people in his life understand the difference between a garage full of old metal and the only place in his life where nothing is asking him to be something other than exactly who he is.